Hello, greetings and good evening. It is always a pleasure for me to be with you on a Sunday evening. Thank you for joining me for yet another episode of Anupali. On this evening's program, we will speak about the 2022 hurricane season. As you know, every June 1st, the hurricane season begins. And I want us to focus our attention on this issue to raise as much awareness as we can, because the protection of lives is of paramount importance for all of us in this country, and certainly for this government. Dominica remains very vulnerable, as we all know, to the threat of severe storms and hurricanes. And every year, we must renew our efforts as a nation to strengthen our systems to protect our citizens and communities. Since 2017, we have committed to building capacity at the individual, household, and community levels to position our country as the first climate resilient country in the world. On Wednesday gone, you saw tangible evidence of that policy when we commissioned 2 regional emergency centers, one in Cassibruce and the other at Jimit. In Cassibruce, it could house at least 300 people, and in Jimit, well over 500 individuals. These centers were built with the support of the European Union at a cost of over $33 million. And these are self-contained facilities that could certainly house us for about 2 weeks with no real interruption after a severe storm. And again, we want to thank the European Union for the tangible, sincere support over the years, and more particularly in the construction, the financing of the construction of these 2 facilities. And so, as I said earlier this week, these are the real and practical steps we are taking to achieve our climate resilience goals. We are ensuring that people in our communities can access safe, clean, and well-equipped spaces in the event of major disasters. On Wednesday, June 1, we go into the hurricane season, as I indicated, which is once again predicted to be an above-average season. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration predicts 14 to 21 named storms. And they're saying that this also includes 3 to 6 major hurricanes. We have to prepare, but we also have to pray to the Lord for protection, because the reality is the hurricane season is here and we can't stop it from coming. And so we in Dominica, we are very familiar with these types of predictions and know from experience that it only takes one, just one, to make landfall in Dominica, to leave vast devastation behind it. And the question is, how have we prepared as a state, as a country? And what do you need to do to safeguard your life, your family, your homes, and your communities? I've invited to the program this evening the program officer at the Office of Disaster Management, Mr. Mandela Christian, and the local government commissioner and chair of the shelter committee, Mr. Glenroy Toussaint, to speak with us this evening, and so they could share with us the information that they have and some of the advice that they would like to provide to us as citizens of Dominica as we prepare for this hurricane season. And we couldn't have asked for 2 better people to be on the program this evening. First of all, I would like to welcome Mr. Glenroy Toussaint. You've been around for some time as the chair of the shelter management, so I think the entire country knows you now. But welcome, please.
Okay, let me say it's a pleasure to be here. Good evening to everyone, wherever you are viewing. It's always a pleasure to be here to importantly disseminate information and to raise the awareness of the Dominican population as far as disaster risk reduction is concerned.
So excellent. And of course, Mr. Christian, welcome.
And good evening, Prime Minister, and good evening, everyone. And thank you very much for this invitation to be on this program and to represent the ODM and share on our programming on preparedness for disaster management for this upcoming season. Thank you, Prime Minister.
Thank you very much. Welcome again, gentlemen. Now, Mr. Christian, let's begin with you. Dominica is forging ahead with its goal to increase our country's resilience to climate change impacts. In the past year, the Office of the Disaster Management, ODM, with the support of CDEMA, has developed the Country Work Program, what they call it CWP, for disaster risk reduction for the period 2021 to 2025. Now, this sounds like something very serious, something very huge. What does that really entail, though?
Okay. Well, Prime Minister, it is simple. The Country Work Program is essentially the work plan for the Office of Disaster Management and the Nippo mechanism over the next 5 years. It is how we will be implementing comprehensive disaster management in Dominica. And what it is really a systematic approach towards implementing climate change adaptation and disaster risk reduction in Dominica. It was, just to give a bit of background on it, it was put together after following a comprehensive disaster management audit that was completed in 2020. And as part of that audit, we did a gap analysis. So we looked at our strengths, where we were strong in our systems, or we were doing well, and where we had some weaknesses or areas for improving. And then we would have formatted all the challenges and weaknesses we saw into this 5-year program, because we really want to address the areas or weaknesses, and we have outlined it in this program and hope to address all of this over the next 5 years. Okay,
excellent. Now, the other document is the Dominica Comprehensive Disaster Management Bill. Very soon it will go to the Cabinet for review and ratification, then go to Parliament. But can you provide our viewers and listeners with a summary of the objectives of this piece of legislation?
Definitely. So this is a very magnificent piece of document, and of legislation, I should say. It's still in draft, as you mentioned. And what it is, as I mentioned, we have outlined quite a comprehensive program for implementing disaster risk reduction in Dominica over the next 5 years. And also we have the ongoing resilience initiative, Honorable Prime Minister. And what this legislation will do, it will give us the authority to implement that program in the legal framework within which we can operate. So it helps us outline our governance mechanism in Dominica for disaster risk reduction. So, and particularly the Nippo mechanism through which we operate, that is the National Emergency Planning Organization. So it identifies the role of the chairperson, which is yourself, the Honorable Prime Minister, the various subcommittees that comprise the Nippo mechanism, the National Emergency Executive Committee, the National Advisory Committee, the subcommittees that comprise them, that address different emergency support functions, the District Emergency Management Committee, or that mechanism that is comprised also of the Community Disaster Management and Community Mechanism, the rules for our volunteers, and for basically all stakeholders with interest in disaster management in Dominica. So it basically outlines and assigns responsibilities to them. It says how we'll be interacting with each other, and more importantly, I should say, it ensures that all that we are doing is in keeping with the humanitarian practices or principles for implementing disaster management. So everything that we are doing has to be in adherence to or has to respect dignity and human rights, and it ensures that we are guided accordingly. We also have to be adhere to the principles of partnership. So our efforts has to be transparent. There has to be accountability. So it outlines all that. It has to be complementary, so that what if one partner is doing something, it's not undermining the works of another partner, because we are all at the end of the day trying to achieve that main goal to become the first resilient nation. So the legislation basically is that gives us the authority to implement our programming and to meet our targets.
Now, when all is said and done, though, are we able to translate these policies into action?
Oh, definitely. And we have been doing so. I mean, it's evident. I mean, take for example with the formation of CREED, for example. This is basically action. We have put into action the National Resilience Development Strategy and the Climate Resilience and Recovery Plan. And CREED is basically spearheading all spearheading the activities or the achievement of the recovery targets, of the resilience targets. We have also seen other action taken. It's evident in the resilient infrastructure that is going up. All the resilient homes and houses that are being built across the island, the health and wellness centers, resilient schools, the improvements to the road networks. So all these are aligned to the resilience targets and all our national and even regional, international strategies. So we are very much putting into action the goals that we have outlined in our targets, in these frameworks.
Now, can you say with confidence that the ODM can face this hurricane season with greater sense of confidence, following from Hurricane Maria, though? Yeah.
Oh, well, yes. What I can say, I'm confident in the ability of the hardworking staff at the Office of Disaster Management and the Nippo mechanism to utilize the available resources to us to implement effective disaster management. And we are definitely at a heightened state of preparedness. I mean, it is very much evident just looking at in terms of our shelters and our shelter capacities, the work that has been ongoing there. We have more resilient shelters, more resilient homes, so the needs will be for shelters will be less, and I'm sure Mr. Tuse will expound on that. We are also seeing more resilient mechanisms. We are doing more training. We have a lot more volunteers right now. So the pieces are all aligned, and we also have systems in place where should our own internal resources or national resources become overwhelmed, we are able to reach out to the regional system through CDMA, the Regional Response Mechanism, to access the available resources at the CARICOM level. And what we have been doing is having discussions with them to ensure that the receipt of this external support is smooth. There's a smooth transition. They are able to plug into our system seamlessly and provide that support that we need in a timely manner should the need arise for it.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Tussell, let me bring you into the discussion there. As head of the local government department and the chair of the shelter committee at Nippo, how much success do you think we have had in informing people at the community level of our various disaster risk reduction strategies to increase their knowledge and readiness?
Well, we have had tremendous success, and I will say that since Maria, we have sort of integrated in our work program the whole issue of disaster risk reduction. And in that regard, we have been working very closely with CREED in ensuring that we work with communities in enhancing and strengthening their capacity and capability to respond to adverse weather events and climatic events as well. And one of the key things that we've done collaboratively with CREED is that we did an assessment of communities to identify their vulnerabilities. And so we were able to rank the communities into 4 categories, 4 areas, so to speak. 1, the most vulnerable, more vulnerable, least vulnerable, and less vulnerable. And so out of those 4 categories, we came up with 13 most vulnerable communities, 28 more vulnerable communities, 11 less vulnerable communities, and about 10 less vulnerable communities. And so what this data shows us is that we needed to, yes, you have to look at a comprehensive approach, but we need to take it in phases. So we first begin and take into consideration the Climate Resilient Recovery Plan, CRRP 2020-2030. One of the key pillars in that plan is strong communities. And strong communities really refers to the ability, having the capacity, communities having the capacity to independently operate as it relates to and respond to disaster and other events that may impact the community. And in order for us to get to that milestone, it means therefore you have to build the capacity of the communities. And when we talk of capacity building, we're talking about training, we're talking about awareness. And so one of the first things that we did was to first work with the most vulnerable communities. We're talking of communities like Good Hope, Petit Soufriere, Saint-Sauveur, Pichelin, Bagatelle, and other areas. We first work with them and we identify the key institutions within those communities. And so you're talking of, for example, you're talking of the disaster management committees, you're talking of the councils, you're talking about the Red Cross groups, you're talking about church organizations, youth groups, and the likes. And so we had to work with those communities in terms of providing that capacity. And we looked at within the capacity framework. One has been to do with community emergency readiness and response. So you're talking of how do you respond as a community as far as disasters are concerned. Emergency response, we're talking about CPR and first aid. It is critical because we know when we are impacted by those hazards, there may be injuries. And so the community having the capacity to respond to injuries that may impact the community is critical in that regard. You're talking about the whole issue, and we saw the gap during Maria, the gap in terms of communication. How do we communicate in communities using ham radio? So that was one area. We looked at the whole issue of hazard analysis and vulnerability assessment. That is very critical. You should have the capacity within your communities to be able to do an assessment of your hazard and, of course, an analysis of your vulnerability. So that is also was very critical in the process. And very importantly, we look at damage assessment. It's critical that we assess the damage that would have occurred or based on the impact. So we have been going through that process. And I can safely say that so far we have trained well over 260 people in the communities. And those persons I referred to earlier with regards to disaster management committees, the local authorities, the village councils, and otherwise. And what we've noticed, though, we've noticed a strengthening. We've seen a strengthening of the number of disaster management committees at the community level. For the more vulnerable communities, we have completed all the community disaster plans. So these communities that I mentioned earlier, the plans are completed for those communities and have been shared with the community. That is very important. Oftentimes, we do intervention in communities and the wider community is not aware of those interventions. And so importantly, those disaster management plans have been shared with the community. I want, of course, to inform the listening public that we also have an intensive program with the with the city of Roseau, where we are currently implementing a Roseau city initiative, a Roseau resilient plan that we call it. And so out of this Roseau initiative is threefold. One is to develop a Roseau city plan, resilient plan. The second is to develop a fire hazard plan for the city of Roseau. And the third one is to develop standard operating procedures for early warning system as it relates to the city of Roseau. And that is more so as it relates to the Roseau River that has, of course, flooded on numerous occasions. I must say that all of the three documents have been completed. And out of that, interestingly and very importantly, we were able to establish what we call a city resilient platform. The platform is basically persons from within the city, comprising the council and other stakeholders, the private sector. And that platform, our intention is not to basically end there. It's for sustainability. And so we are hoping that we can set that platform and guide the process. What is interesting in the process is to ensure that the city residents, because Roseau makes up almost 1/3 of our population. And so it's important that the city residents themselves are aware of that plan. So there has to be a full-scale dissemination of that plan, interacting with city residents so that they can understand the role that they have to play as residents in the process as it relates to the plan. So we're making tremendous progress in that regard. And we are really, really grateful to the support of community members. They've been very supportive. And I think is mindful of the fact that they do recognize within the framework that there's a responsibility for them as individuals within communities to play a part in the resilience of those communities.
And of course, this is ongoing.
And it's ongoing. So we're continuing that process. I must say we've started with the most vulnerable. Yeah. We have done the more vulnerable, and we are now heading to the least and less vulnerable communities. The intention is we had arranged we have to cover the entire island, obviously. And so that process will continue. as we proceed, and we're looking forward to active engagement and partnership in that regard, because we also, very importantly, and I just want to mention as well, PM, just on Monday, we had a national resilient consultation for local authorities. And so all the local authorities, we met at the parish hall and we looked at a number of areas. For example, we looked at the CRRP and the role that the council should play in ensuring that there is resilience at the community level. So we looked at the targets, the key metrics, as it relates to that document, the CRRP 2020-2030. And it basically, in an effort to solidify the role of the councils in building resilience at the community level. And importantly, what really emerges is the need for active collaboration among key partners in that process. And interestingly, what came up is the need for strengthening of the relationship between councils and members of parliament, parliamentary representative for the respective communities, because we believe that is very key in the process. And so we've clearly identified the need for that strengthened collaboration between the councils and the member of parliament as we talk of resilience and building resilience at the community level.
Sure. Mr. Christian, we focus on storms and hurricanes because these are the most common in our country and our region. But we face other threats. How is the ODM building capacity to contend with various disaster events?
Okay, so at the Office of Disaster Management, we implement comprehensive disaster management, which is an all-inclusive, holistic approach towards disaster management in Dominica. And as you rightfully mentioned, we are at risk to numerous, we are very vulnerable, numerous hazards. The hydromet ones, yes, they are the more frequent ones, and we have been working over the past year to upgrade our hydromet network. So that project is ongoing through the DVRP, through the Met Office as well. So we are identifying the network, and that would help with our forecasting and early warning capabilities when it comes to hydromet hazards. We have also been looking at our volcanoseismic monitoring, because as you know, Dominica has one of the highest volcanic densities in the region. We have 9 live volcanoes in our surface area. And that doesn't mean that they are erupting, but there's a potential, there's activity under them, there's a potential for an eruption in the future. And we saw what happened with La Soufrière volcano just last year. And learning from that experience, we are determined to learn from their best practices and to replicate those best practices here in Dominica, so that in the event that, God forbid, I'm knocking wood because we don't want this to happen, that one of the centers become live, we are able to safeguard ourselves or do some early warning. We are able to evacuate persons, notify persons on time, evacuate them to safe locations. So we are working with the VRP again, with the Scientific Research Center out of the University of the West Indies, with SEDIMA, with CREED, with the Forestry Division, and a number of other partners. Probably I shouldn't go down the list for fear of forgetting anybody. But we are working with them to install seismic stations across the island. After Maria, there was some serious destruction to the existing network. We were down to 2 operational stations. Right now, we have installed 8 new stations, and 6 of which are transmitting data in real time right now. And before the ends, we hope to get up to a goal to install 16 stations across the island and transmitting live data to both SRC and us here in Dominica. So that is when it comes to the volcano seismic early warning and monitoring. We are also looking at that. And even for tsunami hazards, we are working with UNESCO to get Dominica Tsunami Ready certified. And that is an internationally accepted certification. That means basically once you are tsunami certified, you have mechanisms in place for early warning, for evacuating persons to safety, for your awareness programs. There's proper signage, and it is something that is not just a national standard, it is internationally recognized. And we are commenting in the community of Calibishi, sorry. We are commenting in the community of Calibishi, and we hope to replicate this programming in all the communities that are vulnerable to tsunamis. So we are actively providing support, looking at all the hazards to which we are vulnerable. We have conducted national hazard, vulnerability, and risk assessments, and all the hazards to which we are vulnerable and at risk, we are implementing, doing our best to implement programming to mitigate against this risk, to prepare for it, and to strengthen our response program to it. And of course, I should mention we continue to provide support to the Ministry of Health with the ongoing operations with response to the COVID pandemic. It's, as you know, COVID is here to stay, it's not going anywhere. And we have had to basically adapt our protocols to ensure that we are able to operate within the COVID pandemic environment, that there's continuance of operations and in a safe manner, and that our response is not watered down because of the pandemic. We are still able to effectively perform that response and disaster management service to the public within the environment, within the COVID pandemic environment.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. Now, disaster management is about setting policy, but it is also about educating and empowering people to take responsibility for their own actions to protect their families. Now the question is now, how is the ODM empowering our citizens to improve their response to disasters?
Well, we have an aggressive public information and education campaign ongoing. We have a wide range of training that we offer at the community level, from community emergency response team training, or better known as CERT, search and rescue, shelter management, damage assessment, and a number of other programs that we do that target the actual community persons. Because at the end of the day, they are the ones who are vulnerable, and we really want to get them involved in the disaster management programming. Because if they take ownership of it, they are aware of the hazards that threaten them, it's more likely that they will take the necessary measures to safeguard themselves and their property and their loved ones against disasters. So we are rolling out training programs. We are also working with other local and regional stakeholders to help provide certain resources or enhance certain infrastructure in the community to help strengthen their resilience. So there's a lot that we are doing, and we are seeing the benefits, because right now our volunteer count is up to approximately 2,000 across the island. And despite over the past 2 years where we had the pandemic and we could not do as much in-person training as we would have liked, because we had to adhere to the COVID pandemic protocols, but we were still able to utilize alternate means, the online means, Zoom, to conduct some training where possible. And now that with the protocols have relaxed, we are trying to aggressively push a lot more training to increase that number.
Excellent. Oh, Mr. Tusse, I know you referenced a lot of training activities which you have been engaged in over the last several months. But as it relates to shelters though, have we gone out into the communities to provide training and guidance?
Well, from a shelter standpoint, what we've done over the last couple of months, we've been having a series of training for shelter managers. So we have covered a number of those sessions. We've gone through. In fact, what we've done is that we use the 7 local government districts, and so far we have been trying to push to consider Kalinago as a district. So we consider Kalinago by itself. So we dealt with Kalinago as a space by itself. And we provided training for all of the shelter managers and other prospective. What is important though in the process is that we look at prospective managers. So persons who are willing and keen to serve. So they were also provided with that sort of training, and we dealt specific, as I said, with the Kalinago space. We also looking at, even within the, what I mentioned earlier, we call it the CERI, the Community Emergency Readiness Initiative. We're looking at the whole issue of family plans. That is very critical in the process. I mean, oftentimes people look at the community as a wider picture, but if the families are not prepared, then the wider community cannot be prepared. And so one of the things that we've been pushing is for family plans. And family plans is a basic. It's looking at your vulnerability, looking at the hazards, and assigning roles and responsibility to family members. That's what it basically is. So we've been pushing that, and we've been making not very much a lot of success in that regard, but And there are some communities, I must say, that seem to be taking on board this concept. It's not a new concept, but oftentimes because it's a new thing, a lot of people are, since Maria, we've started the process since Maria, this family plan, because we recognize clearly that prior to Maria, not many families were even thinking of plans. And we realized that there's a gap. If families were prepared in terms of what to expect, what is required before, during, and after, then we will be able to better respond to climatic and adverse weather events. So certainly that's the push that we put in. Like anything else, as Mandela indicated, we had the issue with COVID where we probably could not do as much as we could do in terms of in-person. However, since the relaxation, we are continuing to strengthen in that regard. So the process will continue.
Now, do you gentlemen think we are doing enough to decentralize disaster management into individual communities? This is a matter I've been raising at Nippo meetings. Have we made progress?
Definitely, we have made progress. Just over the past year, we have developed or established the district disaster management committees in the 7 districts across Dominica and even in the Kalinago territory. So we have full teams right now, district teams, and this is definitely helping with our programming, because we cannot do it all at the Office of Disaster Management. So we are now dependent, or I shouldn't say dependent, but we are now utilizing the resources at the district level to implement our programming. And we are using the support and the volunteers at the district level to provide that additional surge support for the implementation of our programming. Also, the districts are comprised of communities. So by extension, they can reach out to the various community disaster management committees. And we must say thanks to the good work of CREED and local government in establishing these communities, these community disaster management committees. So we have seen a lot of a paradigm shift, basically, from disaster management being heavily focused at the central government or just the ODM office, and it's moving out. We are incorporating a lot more the districts and the communities in what we do.
I think we just need to strengthen on looking at the various institutions within communities, and I think we just need to strengthen on that in terms of, I think, we need to sort of integrate all of the institutions in the communities. We have several of those operating in communities, and so we need to basically strengthen those. But from my view, I think we need to have, in my view, PM and your viewers, we need to have sort of, in many respects, a mini Nippo at the community level. That's how I look at it. You have when I say mini Nippos, basically, you should have a kind of Nippo in your communities. The same structure that Nippo has should sort of reflect in the communities. So you should have your chairman, just like Nippo as a chairman ahead of this. We do have subcommittees, but we need to strengthen them and to allow people to understand the structure that we have in our communities is similar to Nippo, and they can relate. I think that is basically the way forward.
Now, for all of us listening and viewing this program, I think one of the more fundamental questions we have is, what is the basic checklist that we need to put in place to prepare for this hurricane season? So what are the things that I need to do, point form, to better place myself, my family, better prepared for the hurricane season? Who wants to go first?
I don't mind going first, and of course, Mr. Tusek can always support me on this. But definitely, if we start with basic human needs, you need food, you need clothing and shelter. So to prepare ourselves, we need to ensure that we have some food supply, dry goods and teen stuff that we could, non-perishable food items that we could easily move with. We need to ensure that we have a safe place to stay. So if your home or your house is not in a safe location, you need to identify the nearest shelter to you and know how you're getting there. And ensure that you have your general supplies. If you need your own medication, ensure you work with your medication. And any other supplies you may need in that are critical, you can't, I don't say you can't live without, but that you really depend on. And you need to ensure that you have supplies for your dependents. So if you have children, elderly people, you work with enough food, medicine, and supplies for them. And you should also ensure that you have at least 3 to 7 days supply of supplies, because the relief response mechanism will take a little while to kick in immediately after the storm. So you need to be able to store enough supplies up to about 3 to 7 days.
In addition to that, I'm talking about the basic house now. You have to ensure that if you're pretty close to a drain, you make sure that the drain is cleared. Overhanging trees, they cut the overhanging trees. You check your roof, your windows, your doors, those basic checklists, you do that. In addition to that too is your very important documents, maybe your certificate of title, your medical records as indicated, all of those little things, you should have. I'm saying you do. I mean, I'm sure you're referring to looking at the 7 days. I'll go beyond that. We talk about the food supply for 7 days. We know what happens. So certainly I would go beyond the 7-day supply of items. I mean, if you're talking of the shelters, then fine. In terms of maybe 48 hours or 48 to 72 hours, fine. But one has to be very mindful of taking those basic steps that we've mentioned as far as it is preparing for the season. So we're talking of, for example, I did mention it in terms of securing of documents. It's not necessarily securing it to go to the shelter. You should always secure. Just like I would advise people as we move forward, always have a hospital bag, stuff for the hospital. So you've fallen ill, nobody has to search. You just pick up the bag and take you to the hospital. It's a similar thing with the preparation for the hurricane. You have a checklist of maturing your supplies and all of those things, the documents are secured. So when you have got to move, it is much easier to move because you would have already been prepared for the eventuality of any system that may impact us. So we really want to encourage people, and that is where I really want to place again emphasis on the family plan. Ensuring, because the family plan will help in all of those things, because it tells you of the activities that you need to do before, during, and after.
Excellent. Well, here we have it. So I'm sure we've all taken notes of the advice and the basic checklist we should bear in mind as we prepare for this hurricane season. Now, Mr. Christian, last week an emergency operations center was established in the village of Capuchin to serve that general area. Can you tell us more about that project and how it is expected to impact on disaster preparedness in Capuchin?
Okay. So this is part of the ongoing interventions that we are doing to build the resilience at the community level. Capuchin was chosen because of the vulnerability. It's very far from town, and most times after disaster, severe weather conditions, it's easy for them to get cut off the roads and maybe some landslides, some blockage. And even in terms of communication, there were some communication challenges there as well. So this project, which is funded by the government of Canada, costing approximately 150,000 EC dollars. We sought to develop to enhance the capacity and the facilities at the Capuchin Emergency Resource Center, which is also a shelter. So we installed backup water, a 2,000-gallon water tank that came with a pressure tank and a pump. So now they have backup water there, potable water. We installed a 5-kilowatt solar power system that is able to energize the entire building. We installed radio communications, HF and VHF radio base stations there. So they are now able to communicate all the way to with Scott's Head, because we tested it. And as part of the program, we will also be installing repeaters in the heights in Hoja, that's up in Salisbury. And we also did some work on the repeater sites in Mon Espanol. So hopefully that should even increase our communication challenges, or communication, I should say, from Capuchin to the EOC in Jimmet and in Roseau, and the alternate in Roseau. We also did enhance the security features at the site. We changed the locks. We did installed some security lights on the outside, and some tying up of the facility. And we did a lot of training as well. Well, not as much as we wanted because of the COVID protocols, but we were able to do some training, for example, in emergency communications and the use of the radios. And we trained about 50 persons, about 30 of them were women, so that is good. So we are looking at the gender balance as well. And all in all, what we are hoping to achieve is, again, just in alignment with the resilience targets. One of the resilience targets that speak to ensuring that our communities are able to be self-sufficient for up to 1 to 2 weeks post a disaster event. So we are ensuring that they have backup water, backup power, that they have communication, so that in the aftermath of a storm or a disaster event, they are able to function on their own independently up until the point that we could get support to them. And we are empowering the community persons to be able to do that.
So are there other such initiatives happening in other communities to boost resilience and disaster preparedness?
Yes, there are. That is part of an ongoing program. It may not be in that exact format, but we are doing our best, working with the available resources, writing programs, bringing on partners like the local government, even regional and international partners as well to support like programming. So right now we are looking at, for example, the La Plaine community, well, I should say the La Plaine district, and we are seeking to build capacity there as well, and in the south, the Granby district. And as you know, they are basically far, and they tend to get cut off easily post there's severe weather events. So we're doing our best to build the capacity there, install these backup facilities so that they are able to function for a long enough period post disaster event. So yes.
Now, Mr. Tusa, just last Wednesday, as I mentioned in my comments earlier, we commissioned 2 emergency shelters, one in Cassibruce and the other in Jimmet. The one in Cassibruce has a capacity of over 300 people, being able to house over 300 people, and of course in Jimmet over 500 people. Now, has the construction of these facilities made your task a bit easier? This may be an understood response there, but
this is not. It's a lot easier, I must add. In fact, these facilities has significance threefold. One, it has boost shelter capacity. So, for example, we are moving from a shelter capacity of 7,096 last year to 8,200 this year, just by those 2 facilities. And that is way beyond the number of people we expect to be island-wide. So we are way beyond in terms of shelter capacity. We have more shelter capacity than people to go into those shelters. And that is significant, and that is important. So you're talking of 8,200. And for the 2022 Atlantic hurricane season, we may just have to. We just recently completed an assessment island-wide of the number of persons who are required to be taken to emergency shelters, and we are between 3,005 and 3,007. So you're talking of your capacity of 8,200 is way beyond, and that's national. All right, so that's one. We build and boost shelter capacity. Those 2 facilities will ease the burden on the schools that we're using as emergency shelters. We know what happened. Almost 45% of our shelters are schools, and we know what happened after Maria. Many of the schools had to remain closed because persons were occupying the shelters, the schools, and so that will, in fact, ease the pressure that we have on the schools post an event. And thirdly, we have these 2 facilities that are resilient. So people are coming to a very safe facility, a very safe building, a building that can withstand, as I understand, up to category 5. And so those 3 critical areas is very important. And I don't know, but I don't know. I'm very, very, very pleased. I'm heartened. And it just shows that clearly we are taking a step in the right direction in terms of ensuring that the safety, because what is important, and within the framework of any resilience strategy, has to be the issue of fatalities. And as articulated in the CRRP, is zero fatalities we're looking at, and these facilities will help us in attaining the zero fatality. So I am very pleased, and I think the nation is very pleased for this timely gesture as far as securing our people.
Thank you. Now, these facilities, will it be managed and maintained? Is there a plan in place for this?
Yes, there is a plan. We have submitted a facilities operational plan to the ministry, so it should be on its way to cabinet actually. And the plan is quite comprehensive. We are looking at both the emergency use and the normal, well, I should say like the resource center use, because these facilities, they will be used in non-emergency periods as resource centers to do community training, awareness programs, and possibly some recreational events. So there is a plan for maintenance of the facility, for staffing the facility, for cleaning, securing the facility, and hopefully we don't want the buildings to be just sitting there, not in use, and just in the event that something happens, that's when we are going to check on them and to utilize them. We want to ensure that they are integral in the disaster management programming, and not just disaster management, but in the development programming of the communities that they serve, or the districts that they serve.
No, from local governments. Sorry, please go ahead.
I think very importantly as well, we have to look at the facilities as well as outside of disaster management.
Yeah,
that's very important, you know, because we need to enlighten the communities with programs and look at the needs of the community and align those needs to the usage of these facilities. And I think within that plan is also a structure to ensure that there is continued usage of those of these facilities.
Sure, of course, and that is our charge to ensure that there is wide use of the facility throughout the year, not only limited to the hurricane season. Now, this issue of maintenance, though, how does the community play a part or play a role in the maintenance of these facilities? What advice do you have for the communities?
The thing is, one of the things that we are stressing is for the community to take ownership. This is your facility. This is not. This is a facility entrusted to you as community people. And one of the things that we have to guard against is, I want to encourage people to ensure that these two facilities, they're not vandalized. One, they're not vandalized. So we should be the guards, the keepers of those facilities. And of course, importantly, to ensure that when we make use of the facility, we ensure that we don't destroy. So if you see, for example, someone is going out of the way to not upkeep the facility, it's your responsibility to call on this individual or call on these individuals and so inform them that, listen, this is our facility. And not only that, we've gotten a very good facility. It has cost a lot of money. We have to ensure that it's maintained and sustained and it's in pristine condition. And so we really want people to first take ownership. In other words, I want each and every resident of Jimit to see it as their facility. It's just your home now, it's your house. Once you've taken that mindset, it means therefore it's much easier in terms of maintaining and ensuring the place is well kept.
Now, the other question I would like to ask is what is the level of preparation for other communities in Dominica? Are shelters generally sorted and equipped for this hurricane season? I know you've done a lot of training, et cetera, et cetera.
Oh yes, let me just give some statistics before I begin. In fact, we have moved from 114 shelters in 2021 to 123. That's including the 2 regional shelters. So we have increased the number of shelters that we have for the 2022 Atlantic hurricane season, and that is as a result of a number of the schools. For example, the Will Strathmore Primary School that was recently commissioned, and we have the Trafalgar Primary School, and we have also the Soufriere Primary School, a number of those shelters, and we had to do that in view of COVID as well. So we've had to expand, and so that is one of the things. In terms of supplies, what we have been doing since last year, and we continue this year, is pre-positioning supplies for the shelters. Because we recognize clearly, and one of the concerns, and I really want the general public to sort of understand the concerns that we have. One of the challenges that we have is when we provide supplies to those shelters. Oftentimes when you do an inventory, come the next year, something may have just slipped or disappeared or something of that nature. And the approach that we're taking, and because many of our shelters are schools, some of the schools don't even have storage facilities. And so we've taken the approach where we can. So most of the community centers, we have given them their supplies already. They have their supplies, everything. That's non-food item. I'm talking about cots and mattresses and beds and first aid kits. And the intention for this year is we are going to heavily depend on the storage facility in Casibus. So we're going to store all of the supplies for the east, which is the from Atkinson back to Petit Soufriere. We are going to store it at the storage facility in Casibus. That will soon be commissioned. We're hoping to do a similar thing for the north in Portsmouth. There's a storage facility that is completed in Portsmouth, and we're hoping to do that. So the thing is, once we've done that, it's much easier to sort of transport and take it to the various shelters. So as I indicated, most of the shelters, the community centers, we've already given them all of their supplies. And we do have, and we will continue that process in prepositioning those supplies so that we don't have the difficulty in people have to take the supplies from a central location in town or somewhere of that nature. It makes it much easier. We already done an assessment, we already know what supplies that have to be given, and we have sufficient, I must say. What we may have to extend is the whole area of the COVID and the mask, because we know oftentimes when there are some people who really may not be able to afford the mask and the other things. But in terms of the other supplies, we are well stocked in that regard for the emergency shelters. And we're in a much better position, I must say, in terms of supplies. And I'm being very fair. We are in a better position in terms of supplies than we were last year, as far as it regards emergency shelters. And one of the things that we're seeking to do through the local authorities is to ensure that the community members understand and know the shelters, one, and secondly, understand what is required of them when they get to those emergency shelters.
Now, you referenced COVID-19. Are we saying that the protocols where COVID-19 is concerned still apply this year?
No, they're not. But we have to be vigilant and be mindful that COVID is still around. Yeah. So we're not going to do this 6 feet social distancing. Okay. That is no longer. But people must wear the masks, okay. Right? And must sanitize, and must clean, and must wash your hands, and we clean the shelter. Okay. That sort of thing. But the protocol in terms of this social or physical distancing, that is off, and that makes it even that has eased the burden for us, because last year because of this 6 feet distancing, that posed a little challenge because we had to get additional shelters for some communities because of the numbers. So it has certainly enhanced and helped us. But I want us to understand, as we say all of that, we still have to do what is necessary in terms of our mask and our sanitizing and things of that nature to fight against the COVID-19 pandemic.
No, Mr. Chris, thank you very much. No, Mr. Christian, we've been referencing a lot on the hurricane shelters because that's what most people see and most people know in the communities. Because we all want to know where is the hurricane shelter in the event we have to go there. But there are many other committees or subcommittees within the National Emergency Planning Organization. What can you tell us, though, about the readiness of the Nippo subcommittees? Okay. So that's maybe you may not have the time to speak on all of them, but highlight some of the critical ones.
Things. Certainly, Prime Minister. So yes, Nippo has been works round the clock, round the year actually, to maintain a heightened state of preparedness in the country, not only for hurricanes, but for all hazards that may impact us. So Mr. Tusa would have expounded nicely on the preparedness for shelters. He's the chair of that subcommittee. We have also the Public Utilities Subcommittee, and they have done quite an exceptional job in maintaining and updating their database of heavy equipment and operators across the island. And it's not just the trucks and the backhoes and these big equipments, but also chainsaws and the small equipment and chainsaw operators. And they have an eye there, and they are tracking them, I should say, so they are knowledgeable as to their whereabouts, where they're situated across the island. And so should something happen, and it doesn't even have to be a hurricane or a storm, Just, I think, a few weeks back, we had some heavy rains and there were some landslides, and they were able to quickly mobilize those resources to clear the debris. So they have that in place. The other utilities, the WASCO, DOMLEC, the telecommunication service providers, they have informed us that they have updated their business continuity plans, and that there are mechanisms in place for continuing operations for as long as possible. And should their services be interrupted, they have mechanisms in place for quickly restoring those facilities. When it comes to food and general supplies and relief, we have been working with entities like the World Food Program, SEDIMA, to strengthen our relief programming. As Mr. Tusa mentioned, we recently commissioned just early this month, actually, recently May, yes. Early this month, I think it was May 2nd, about 2 additional warehouses, one in Castlebrus, so these are district warehouses, one in Castlebrus and one in Cotton in Portsmouth. So that has augmented our storage capacity at the district level. So now the food and general supplies, in addition to the national warehouses that they have in Longhouse, Portsmouth and in town, they have access to these warehouses to preposition items. And also at the ODM, we have our warehouses there. When it comes to communication, which was a key challenge post-Maria, we have been working to install radios, that's VHF and HF radios, and repeaters across the island. So we have installed over 15 instruments in 15 systems in vulnerable communities across the island, and we still have some more to install. One of the challenges that I would say that we are facing is, as Mr. Tusa would have mentioned, is identifying secure locations to install them in some of the communities. Not every community has like a public center, so we are depending on, or working, I should say, with private sector entities and volunteer groups to see how we could install them there. And this is ongoing. So when it comes to communication, and I think another key one I will mention is just the transport. So we have identified helicopter landing sites across the island. These are mostly playing fields, and we have georeferenced them. So we have the GPS coordinates for these sites. So in the event that we bring in external support and we have to do helicopter lifts for medical purposes or for relief, we can provide them the pilots with the GPS locations so that they could get to the impacted communities that may be cut off. So that's just a few of the things that we are doing, and a lot more is ongoing.
Excellent. Now, Mr. Toussaint, outside of the COVID protocols, which we have addressed, what should people coming into the shelters know, and what are some of the relevant guidelines for this?
Thank you very much.
I know we've had some issues in some shelters.
The thing is, we, like we said earlier in our discussion, we're encouraging people to come with some basic food items for at least between 24 to 36 hours, right? That sort of thing. So there's some water, some dry canned foods, and that sort of thing. If you have to, bring your valuable possession in terms of whatever you think is your medication. So people need to ensure that if you come into the shelter, you have to ensure that you take in your medication with you. But there are sort of basic guidelines that we sought to encourage the population to adhere to. We are saying that no smoking, no drinking, alcoholic beverage, no weapons, and we are saying that all laws of the country will continue, will remain in force. You know, so no drinking, no indecent language. Ensuring that the thing is, what we sought to allow people to understand that we are during that time, we're in an atmosphere we should be in an atmosphere of solemn moment, you know, of understanding that it's something that we all are going through. And so we want to encourage people we've had to be very strict over the years. I mean, we've had to, and the reason for that is that there are guidelines. You've got to follow it. And I'm saying that like we've been in the past, we're going to be very strict in the guidelines. If you believe that you can carry any weapon, or if you can take in alcohol or stuff like that, we are going to ensure. And one of the things that we do, and want to inform the listening public, is that we are posting the guidelines. So there are strategic locations where we post the guidelines. And one of the things that we are working on this year to do, mindful we have migrants. So we are working in terms of allowing the guidelines to be either in the Haitian language or in the Spanish, because we do have migrants who, and many of them are going to access our shelters. So we have to ensure that this year, and I'm working with, I'm partnering with an organization that will seek to help in that regard, so that when we put the guidelines, yes, we'll have it in English, but additionally too, we'll have it in Creole and Patois, or in the Haitian language, and also in Spanish as well for migrants. We also have to look, and we have to work with us also our friends from the People's Republic of China as well, because they too are here and they're required to be sheltered as well. So we are looking at that so that we understand that when we're communicating, we communicate with as wide a spectrum as possible as it relates to the shelters. And one of the questions that was raised, the whole issue of security at the shelters, and I clearly indicated that we can call on the police to, we have to secure the shelter among shelters. We cannot call the police to come and intervene in a simple matter in terms of putting rules and regulation and order at our emergency shelters. And so it has been working well. We have had shelter teams with security, and that has been working well for some communities. And so we are hoping to extend it in the wider Dominican population, so that we understand that all of us collectively have a responsibility in those shelters to make sure that the people are safe, the safety of the persons who are being sheltered.
Now, how can the public keep abreast of reliable, up-to-date information from both the ODM and the shelter committee? Because, you know, people get information from all sources, especially social media. What's our guidance to the public on this?
Let me go for it. There's critical in that process, and we are working very closely, I must say, although you probably didn't mention it, but a very critical subcommittee in that regard is the education subcommittee.
Information education.
That
yes.
education, yes. That is that subcommittee is very critical in the process. And so we would heavily engage and expect the education committee to disseminate that sort of information. We have I know not everybody will be able, they're not computer savvy and stuff like that, but there's information that is disseminated on the government website. For example, we always tell people, once we have published the shelters, we ask them to go to the government website to see what is there and things of that nature. But we also want to encourage the people to look at, you know, the reliable information coming from the Office of Disaster Management, the Met Office, and Nippo. That is very, very critical. That is the only, in my view, that is the only source of information for us in Dominica as far as disasters are concerned.
Sure.
The Met Office, the Office of Disaster Management, and Nippo.
Sure. Thank you.
So yes, so
Christian?
we get our information from the credible service providers. So as Mr. Tuse would have mentioned, if it's hydromet or weather-related events, we'd get our information from the Met Service, who is appointed by the government to provide that information. If it's a volcanic seismic event, we get our information from the Seismic Research Center, who is appointed to provide that information. So we go to the source, the credible source for information. So when you post it, it is approved by the credible source, and of course has a seal of approval from the government of Dominica. And we do so via, as Mr. Tusa also mentioned, via the Public Information and Education Subcommittee that is shared by GIS on the radio stations. We do our best to broadcast on all the radio stations, on social media, and even on our website, so persons have access to it. If it's an emergency, but we really need to get the information out quickly, we do so through our ministry channels, using the HF, VHF radios, communicating with our districts and community disaster management personnel, and they would use the traditional means. It could be a conch shell, ringing the church bell, or walking through the community to pass on that information. And they themselves, they support us with outreach in the community, where they would go, they'd have meetings and community meetings and do the house to house and pass on that information. So basically, once it's coming through the Nippo mechanism, from the ODM, Nippo, or through our disaster committees at the district or community level, basically they're getting information through us and we get it from the source, it's approved. That is what we expect the public to do. That's information we expect the public to use.
Well, thank you very much, gentlemen. I believe that you have given a lot of information to the public, and very pertinent information, very useful and timely information. And this is what I said to the nation when I spoke from Jimit on Wednesday, that we will be sensitizing the public in terms of our preparation, in terms of what they need to do, because the government and Nippo can do all of what it has to do. If at the community, family, individual, business level, people do not play their part, then we're worse off. We're worse off. And so I recognize that we are stressing heavily on empowering and educating individuals, households, businesses, communities to be aware of what they can do to protect themselves and to protect their families and their properties. And I think if all of us in this country were to follow those instructions and those guidance, we would be in a much better place. The hurricanes will always come. The question is, what are we doing to prepare for that eventuality? We'll continue to pray, and we need to pray to ask for God's protection from the hurricane season, but we also have to prepare. We can't just sit and pray and not do anything. We have to do both. So we have to have our faith and trust, but we also recognize that we do not want to be a foolish virgin. We want to ensure that we always have oil in our lamps for any eventuality, because it comes a quick second. We saw how Maria went from category 2 to category 5 in, I believe, in less than 36 minutes. So things can happen, and can happen rapidly. So let's continue to do what we have to do. We've had an experience in recent memory, and that alone should serve as a motivation for us to do all that we can to protect ourselves and our country from this disaster. I want to wish you a wonderful Sunday evening. I want to wish you a wonderful and productive week. Let us go forth and serve our God and to serve our country. Let us be positive about ourselves, our abilities, and that of our country. And because if you think positively, you will do positive things. If you think negatively, you will do negative things. And I'm sure we'd all like to be positive and therefore do positive things. Thank you. God bless you. And I want to again thank my guest, Mr. Glenroy Toussaint, who is the local government commissioner and the chairman of the shelter committee. And I must say, Mr. Toussaint, you have certainly been exceptional in carrying out your duties. I have the greatest of admiration and respect for you, and the commitment you bring to the task, and the enthusiasm and the passion. I tell people, passion is 80% of the work. And once you have passion, things can be done. And then, of course, Mr. Christian, you are one of the foremost disaster experts in the country and certainly the region. I want to say to the country that many regional international institutions would like to grab him away. And I'm always so impressed and comforted to see young people providing leadership in very important institutions. And I want to commend you for your commitment to country and your dedication to your task. And so you have my highest commendation for your commitment and love of country. Thank you very much all. God bless. See you next Sunday, God's willing. Thank you.